Let's go to Jon Pinkus. He joins me now. He's an employment lawyer and partner at Samfiru Tumarkin. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
So John Tory says this was a consensual relationship that he had, but it was still between a boss and a subordinate. Are there any legal concerns in a situation like this?
Strictly speaking, there's nothing illegal about a boss and a subordinate being in a relationship. The problem becomes where there's implications that that relationship may not be fully consensual, or the image that that relationship may not be fully consensual, and that can lead to termination in some cases.
Give me an example of what you mean that it may not be consensual. We hear from the other party, you mean?
Right. So, well, not necessarily. The problem is that even if the other party doesn't come out and say this is not, this is a non-consensual relationship, when you have that power imbalance and you have a romantic relationship between a superior and a subordinate, there is this issue that the person may not have the power to speak up and say that it's not consensual. They may feel constrained from speaking up and saying it's not consensual, and it may just not be an appropriate thing for that person to be doing. If you are in a position where someone is directly reporting to you, it's generally seen as against the terms of your employment to be using that relationship in a way that is personal and gives you an advantage over that person.
Many companies do have workplace rules in place against this kind of a relationship for the reasons you mentioned. So could somebody be fired over this? Is that sort of typically the result when this kind of relationship becomes public?
Well, employers have pretty wide discretion to let someone go, so they could fire you. The question is, are they going to owe you severance? And in most cases, it's going to be a termination without cause. And in most cases, that means that severance is going to be owed. Certainly, if it is a relationship between coworkers or a relationship between different departments. There are even some cases where a superior-subordinate relationship may not be a termination for cause. It's going to be very contextual.
Okay, what about relationships where the employees work together, but there isn't a power difference? Those, I imagine, would be fine, but sometimes workplaces still want you to reveal those.
Right. So the problem is that if you have a policy that says we need you to disclose all workplace relationships, or we have a policy against all workplace relationships, then you might find individuals who are in non-consensual relationships who are feeling pressured against disclosing that. If you have two consenting people in a relationship and the employer wants you to report it, and you report that, that's typically not going to be grounds for that employer to terminate you without severance, although they may decide to terminate you anyway if they don't want that in the workplace, and that isn't illegal.
As far as a situation like this where it's employment, but it's employment by municipal government, I take it there would be one policy that is broadly applied to the public sector?
Well, no, every public sector is going to have their own policies and procedures, and Toronto in particular doesn't appear to have a policy that speaks to this. People in public office, according to the City Code of Conduct, are supposed to conduct themselves in a way that is appropriate, in a manner that allows them to conduct their affairs with integrity. And obviously, Mayor Tory decided that this was going to interfere with his ability to carry that out. But there's nothing, strictly speaking, that says no romantic relationships in the workplace, and it is going to differ from one public body to the other.
I'm surprised, and I'm going to tell you why. We've had so much outcry in the past, let's say 10 years, since the Weinstein situation about subordinates and employers, that I thought a lot of employers would update their policies to reflect what has changed.
Some of them have, but I think a lot of them have just assumed that it's understood that this is the way it is and that people are going to be in trouble if they do this. And we see this naturally play out. And this is actually a perfect example. If we think about the time between this story coming to light and Mayor Tory resigning, there's this understood, commonly kind of abided by rule that if you are caught in this situation, you're not going to be able to continue on with your duties if you are in a highly visible, particularly a highly public role in the public sector or the private sector.
Yeah, but you could, because there's actually no, as you mentioned, legal fallout, and if your code of conduct doesn't say anything specifically about this, technically you could?
You could, and technically there may have been a way for Mayor Tory to continue in his role. I think the decision that was made here was a pragmatic decision. It was a political decision, and it was knowing what the next few months were going to look like, because we've seen this story play out so many times. And we know that it doesn't look good for the party that's accused of this, especially if there's no dispute that it happened, which is the case here.
Jon Pinkus, good to have you on. Thanks very much for your time.
Good to be here.